Let's start. Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to open the Vianova Road Safety Awareness Month. Throughout the past years, what we've been observing is that automotive companies have deploying extensive sensors, camera-based systems, lidars into cars. While a growing number of cars is also being connected, the information that is generated here becomes accessible. And with regard to autonomous driving, there's people who are confident that at some point in the future, cars will be capable to process the full complexity of the world by themselves. And that demonstrates quite well the quality of the information that is being generated from connected cars. Today, I'm very happy to discuss with both Frédéric Robinet and Pedro Homem how can we make this data accessible and translate it into something that is useful and relevant for the road safety work of cities and governments. So first, I would like to introduce Pedro Homem, who is coordinating the POLIS working group on governance and integration, focusing on policymaking and innovation, but who is also coordinating the POLIS working group on safety and security. Pedro, before his work at POLIS, was responsible for the development of the Vision Zero plan of the city of Lisbon, and he is known to be an expert on urban and universal design. Welcome, Pedro. Great to have you here.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you.
So the floor is yours for a few opening remarks.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We tend to believe when we take bringing the perspective of local and regional government, if I may, when we tend to discuss the potential contribution of data and of information to promoting road safety at the urban level, there are, I think, a few things that we miss. And it's important to discuss them very shortly because if we miss them, we miss a big opportunity. And at the same time, they become big obstacles to really changing the way local and regional authorities are advancing road safety. First element to understand is that discussing road safety in the abstract is a mistake. There are three distinct settings that we should bear in mind. I mean, we can multiply those different categories, but just to simplify, on one end of the spectrum, we have highways and motorways where walking and cycling is prohibited. They have higher volumes and higher speeds. On the other end of the spectrum, you have city streets where you want people to walk and cycle. And somewhere in the middle of this spectrum is that tricky issue of rural and suburban roads, which were often rural roads converted to carry higher volumes and speeds of traffic, and which don't often have sidewalks, and yet people have to walk and cycle on them. And the thing is that these three distinct settings pose distinct challenges, require distinct approaches, provide distinct opportunities, and involve distinct stakeholders. So, and that goes for whoever gets to decide things there, also to what kind of decisions are to be made, and so necessarily what kind of data we need and how we're going to use them. So that's one thing. And I'm particularly interested, of course, in discussing the two types of settings over which local and regional authorities have specific authority and jurisdiction, and that is streets and these rural and suburban roads. The second thing we have to bear in mind is that we know that around 40% of serious injuries and deaths, traffic serious injuries and deaths in the European Union, they take place in urban streets. But the point is that cities and regional authorities, they are in charge, they have jurisdiction over much more than 40% of the network. I mean, look at the road network in any country of the European Union, just extract the national roads and the highways, and everything else usually is managed by local and regional authorities. So the percentage of deaths and serious injuries happening in parts of the network that these local and regional authorities oversee is actually much higher than 40%. And a final element in this very brief introduction is that it's kind of a mistake to just discuss data. I mean, data is the raw material to get information. From information, you get insights. Insights lead to the way we frame the decisions. Then they support decision making, and finally they lead us to action, and then to implementation, and then to evaluation. And for local and regional authorities, and particularly for the professionals working in this domain, the question is having data only insofar as data provides them with, let's say, the fuel or the support to take these other steps. And obviously the question then remains, well, how can we convert this raw material into the, let's say, things that we need? And that's, I think, one of the key issues that I look forward to discussing today. So that's it.
Excellent. Thanks, Pedro, for your opening remarks. And with this in mind, I'm handing over to Fred. Fred is the CTO of Vianova and one of the 3 co-founders. Before his work at Vianova, Fred had been working for Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, running their connected car platform as a CTO. And Fred is also a graduate of Epitech. Welcome on board, Fred, and happy to hear your opening statement.
Hi, Marcus. Hi, everyone. So thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be part of this panel. I will try to bring some views from the technological insight, but also by working at Vianova and partnering with cities and government for multiple use cases in the last 3 years. I think we have some good ideas of what the data can bring, and I agree with Pedro that we can see 3 different, let's say, segment of the public space and the problem that we would like to address. But the common thing between all those segments, between highways, city, street, and suburbs, is the fact that now, based on the trend of connecting everything, we have more and more data available. And I agree also to say that this data can be raw, can be massive, but we have more and more data everywhere. It's not only coming from the cars that are more and more connected, but it's also coming from the other user of the public space, because here I think this is the main concern, that the space that has been crafted in the 90s or the 80s has been done for mainly car, and now because there is this modal shift happening, the same space has to be shared with multiple users and multiple way of moving within the same areas. So this is why it's creating some tension on the public space, because we have to share the same areas. And thanks to the data, because not only cars but pedestrian or cyclists, or what we can call vulnerable road user, are also connected. And by combining those information, not only accessing the raw data, we can create some valuable insight. And I will also agree that those insights are here to help the decision. So at the end, we can make data-driven decision at the city level.
Thank you very much. I think we already quite well see the 2 sides in this conversation. So Pedro, you have already demonstrated the different levels of road safety, looking into rural areas like highways, but also urban areas. What Fred, you have well introduced the different data that we have from cars, but also road users and so forth. So I think this is a very good start to the conversation, and I would like to dig a little bit deeper with you first, Pedro, looking into how do cities actually structure the work on road safety. So especially who is in charge of road safety, especially looking onto the different levels that you've mentioned before, and which stakeholders are also key to take decisions?
Well, that's a yes or no question, right? Well, I think, first of all, we need to start with a reality check. There are, in the European Union, there are around 800 cities with over 25,000 people. 800. If we squeeze our brains to come up with cities that are doing great in terms of road safety, Helsinki, Oslo, and then Barcelona and Paris are doing great stuff, and Brussels and Berlin, and then Groningen, and then it starts becoming more difficult, and then there are a few others, London as well, and there's not in the EU, but okay, so whatever. You start squeezing. I mean, you can come up with, maybe brainstorming as a team, you can come up with what, 20, 30 names of cities? There are still 770 other cities in the European Union. And so what we try to think is, of course, how, some cities are clearly front runners, and that's great. They're early adopters. They're leading the way to innovation. That's great. Our question also at POLIS is, how can we help the other 770 rise to the challenge? And what we see is a growing number of cities and the national authorities as well, and international authorities stepping up with commitments for ever more ambitious targets for road safety. That's good. Reducing, the European Union is committed to reducing road fatalities by 50% by the end of this decade. And many cities are committing to zero. The question is, where is the capacity to deliver in these 800 cities? So the second point would be that we must realize and acknowledge and value the true importance of what is called in the literature organizational capacity. So the capacity of an organization to deliver on its own commitments. And very simply put, we can look at it from there are three main components. There's resources, there's people, and there's processes. So the people is, well, do you have people for that? And also, are they trained? Are they capable? Are they supported? Number one. The processes are, well, it can be from Vision Zero plans, from sustainable urban mobility plans, etc. But it's also about how everyday decisions are made. As to, for example, how do we maintain the crosswalks? How do we make sure there's money there to maintain the crosswalk? When can we put the traffic calming measure? Do you want to raise the crosswalk? Do you want to do a bottleneck? How do you do that exactly? What about the tactile paving for the blind in the crosswalk? Is there a standard for that? All of those things are processes that make sure that decisions all push in the same direction. And that's a big problem when that is missing. And finally, the question of resources. I mean, yeah, money. But, I can tell you from my own experience, I started developing a strategic plan to promote pedestrian safety in 2009, where, Europe, and personally in my country, Portugal, was undergoing a huge financial crisis. We had this major meeting with around 100 stakeholders from all over the city, what are the main obstacles to advancing pedestrian safety? And we were expecting, well, everybody will say is the lack of money. Well, that came in 12th. The big questions were about the attitudes, the expectations, the training, the processes that were or were not in place. So resources, people, and processes. And tools. And resources are not just about money. It's also about the tools that you have. When I look at, for example, the work that you're doing at Vianova with data and what Frederick has mentioned about having data. Yeah, having data is important. But what good can I do? What can I do with a bottle of gasoline if I don't have an engine? And that's how I see, well, not a nice metaphor for these sustainable times, but the point is that's how I look at tools like Vianova. Okay, fine, we have the fuel, but then what do we do with it? I just carry the data around. I mean, who's going to crunch this data? Who's going to provide me with the insights? Finally, another important element is how different cities have these different amounts of resources, people, processes, and what have you. And finally, obviously, there's also the competing political priorities of, traffic management, parking, how do we deal with shared micromobility? How do we accelerate the shift to sustainable mobility or not? How do we provide cycling? So, at the same time, I would say that often, unfortunately, road safety is the least sexy of all these priorities, at least for the transport professionals. I can tell you from my own experience, that's not the case for the citizens, for the voters. They highly value road safety, particularly in the places where they live or where their kids go to school. So, answering your question, how do cities structure their work? Well, it depends on a lot of stuff. And the key thing here is that we must acknowledge and respect diversity. And assuming that there's a standard correct procedure for cities to organize themselves to advance road safety, and this is how you should be doing it, is wrong. And diversity should really be the point of departure for any discussion on how cities can improve their game.
Thank you very much for this opening, for this answer, Pedro. And I think I would like to forward these impressions to you, Fred, especially how do Vianova structure their work? So like, are we deploying a one-size-fits-all solution from one city to every other city, or do we deploy strategic measures to address exactly what Pedro just said, that every city and region has their own characteristic and background?
Yes, thanks for this question. So I would like to agree with Pedro in the way that not all the cities are equal when it comes to budgeting and finding the solution to address the current problem. So at Vianova, we have identified the three main problems that cities could have, and those are the three pillars. So make cities safer, greener, and more efficient. On the make cities safer, we believe that the data is a way to equally access to insight that could help cities prioritize the way they would improve the public space. And they don't need a big budget for that. In the past, it was done with a local study or expensive thing. But the good news is, thanks to the technology and the fact that more and more vehicles are connected, it was also lowering the cost and the entry gate to accessing those data. Now it's way more easier, but there will be another problem. The problem is, before the cities, they didn't have data. Now they have too much. And those data are complex by nature because they are three-dimensional. They are qualifying points in space, time, and with some intensity. And those geospatial data sets are heavy because vehicles are generating terabytes of information every day. Not all of them are important or meaningful when it comes to road safety. So I think there are multiple aspects. The first one is how much data do we need and what kind of data do we have locally? It's always a contextual. So having the good partners and identifying which data is available for which city is important. So at Vianova, I think we have a really good coverage by having partner with more than 100 data provider across Europe and the world. So identifying the good sources. Second thing is identifying the data that are meaningful for road safety. And we, by piloting and studying with working with road safety experts, we saw that there are a few of them that are interesting to detect, let's say, abnormal behavior. We believe that harsh braking and overspeeding are two KPIs that could be meaningful. Then there is this, let's say, calculation of KPI and mapping that through the entire city, which is technical, which is a complex task, technically speaking. So this is also something that we provide to cities. We are able to map an entire city. It could represent like 100K segment for the city of London, and by being able to qualify the risk for each of those segments based on multiple layers and data, it makes this information accessible and for any type of city, not only the top 10, top 20 that could afford budget for, let's say, field study.
Excellent. Thank you, Fred. When it comes about road safety, cities are also in the driver's seat of taking relevant actions where it matters most. So I would like to understand further, Pedro, how do cities take action today? Like how do they determine where they take action, and how can we equip the people who are pushing for the decisions with more information, with accessible information that would support you in the process of getting to a decision?
Well, the first step is really to get into the driver's seat. And that implies acknowledging that there are underlying structural factors to road deaths and serious injuries. That it's not just a cultural happening, that these are not accidents, that, oh, bad luck, or, you know, an inevitable turn of fate. There are, if you look at the, once you have the opportunity using data to look at the spatial distribution of crashes, you clearly see that that distribution isn't random. If it isn't random, that means there are underlying structural factors. Now, local and regional authorities, as the ones in charge of infrastructure, their job is to look at these structural factors. And so that acknowledgement is a critical first step into taking responsibility for road crashes. Doesn't mean that it's the cities that are killing the people. It means that they are the ones that have the power, that have the biggest effect, and to really leverage their competencies in terms of public space authority to really fix the factors that are recurrently generating these things. You know, blaming human error. There's some stupid data going around saying, oh, 95% of the crashes are caused by human error. There's a very funny man who wrote a lot about safety, and he said that, well, it may be true. It may be true. He said something like, you know, it may be true that human error is underlying most accidents, but you know, that's really not very useful. It's a bit like saying that gravity is behind most of the falls. Yeah, sure, it's gravity. So the question is, so human error is a factor to be processed in. So sorry, number one is cities must get into the driver's seat. We also need to understand that when we talk about data and spatial distribution and numbers of where these things are happening, that for people working at the local level, you know, these numbers always sound too high or too low. But once you look at their spatial distribution, they always feel like, oh, there's only one spot here. And hotspot, I mean, that's three dots over there. I mean, it's 3 dots in 5 years. What's that? It doesn't look like much. So again, we need to process the data and to really understand. And we know that with statistics, you know, the lower quantities have higher variability. I remember the first time I presented, I got the spatial distribution of pedestrian crashes in my city. I showed it to the planning director. He said, oh, we should intervene here, here, and here. Those are the priorities. And why? Because there's a death here and another one here and another one there. But that was just, you know, not where all the death or most of the deaths and serious injuries were happening. You know, this higher variability is a problem. So introducing, I also wanted to tell you that, you know, that bringing in more data, particularly the harsh braking, the near misses, it's really, really useful because it gives more, makes the analysis definitely more robust. Also, when we think about another point is that, you know, decision-making, look, use a euphemism if you'd like, but to be completely honest, and I think it happens everywhere in the public and the private sector, it's about how the human brain works. Our decision-making isn't linear, it's not purely objective, quite the contrary, or rational. And there are, and when we talk about what are the priorities, I'll tell you what are the priorities. The priority is the car, because for the past century, the automotive industry invested billions of euros and dollars in car advertising and basically shaped the whole cultural attitude and expectations about, what's mobility supposed to look like and what you're supposed to want. So, that's the priority, unfortunately. So this kind of cultural background is against this cultural background that often these decisions are made. So regarding data in particular, to define the priority, we have to understand that for people, when you're in a buffet, you put on your plate, the amount of food that you think you're going to eat. And we have to understand that, on the one hand, if we promise local and regional officials, transport, have more data. I mean, it can actually feel kind of threatening if, for example, if the way the process works isn't according to data. So we have to understand that data must be used for more than just act here, act there. That's the priorities. We have to have a fuller view of it. We have to understand that identifying a priority is but one step. I mean, I'm not even going into how the priority is identified. That's another conversation. Again, it's not linear. But even once you have a priority, you need to get a designer to do the work. The design must be checked and approved by other departments, the public space, the green space, the traffic, the public transport, etc. And then you have to prepare contracting of construction, and then you have to contract the construction and have to do the construction. And I'm not even counting with the time necessary for the public hearing, etc., etc. So my point is that often it's not just that we start, this is the priority, this is what we do, and we're going to act there. Often is more like, there's opportunities. Oh, look at that place. It's a bad place. We're going to do some renovations there. Let's use it. And for that, it's useful to have data so that the designer in charge of the public space rehabilitation, instead of just looking at how many trees and how many, he can see, oh, and look, here are the crashes or the near misses, so that he can act on this opportunity. So actually, more than the big projects or the priorities going from A to Z, it's actually how can we provide the dozens of professionals that every day are making dozens of micro decisions, how can we provide them with information that makes it easy for them to integrate and act on insights from road safety data? And that's, again, one of the major potentials of, the work that you're doing is really that it provides everyday professionals who are not the road safety experts in the city. It's the guy, the landscape architect, the urban designer, the guy running public transport, whatever. They can check for themselves what's going on. And if they know, then they can, within the remit of their action and decisions, they can act on it. So that's why it's really important to make data available, not data, the insights, the information. Make it easy for people who don't know data, who don't have ArcGIS on their computer, to really enable them to see what's going on there. Because I have to make a decision for this street. Let me know how safe it is. And that's, I think, very important.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And I think one step forward, what would be very interesting is to understand maybe from your side, Fred, we have a large number of different data sets accessible, however, or available. But what we need to make sure is that we translate it into something that for the city side who is supposed to take decisions is sufficiently understandable, accessible, relevant, but also good enough for a larger audience of different levels of political decision makers to understand and to be convinced. So Fred, maybe you can provide a bit of an insight of how we translate all the different data, and also how we provided in a way that it becomes accessible, that it also becomes convincing to others?
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. That's a really good question. So when it comes to data and decision making, I would see three different way of doing. There is the traditional approach where you will wait for something bad to happen, and you will be working in a reactive mode. You will, after some injuries or crash or something heavy happening on the public space, there will be a reaction like something has to change. So this traditional approach can be improved. There is the futuristic approach where data could predict things, but this is again, this is futuristic. We don't think it's reasonable today. So we can say we are in between. Data is already there, and it could help not to wait that something bad happen and not predict the future, but tell you actually, or within a reasonable time frame, what is happening in the public space from a multiple perspective. And this is what data can bring. It will not change the way that infrastructure change in the city or the decision or the processes. It's a long process. It's a lot of investment and from a multiple stakeholder, financially or in terms of time. But we can reduce the time either at the beginning when some has to study the public space and be able to spot where we see an opportunity to improve the safety, because by combining different layers, not only the information coming from the connected cars, but from the pedestrian and from the bicycle or from some external factor that could also lead to some crashes, like the weather is playing an important role in that. By combining those multiple factors, people will have another way of reading the map and understanding where they might see risk today without waiting for the fatalities to happen. So that's why the data is important. But when you go into that direction, you will see that it's complex. So that's what Vianova can bring, this combination of data, layering on the map and giving knowledge and insight that, of course, at the end, I will agree that with Pedro, it's a human decision and nobody is more self-aware than the person in charge of the safety of the city. So Vianova cannot pretend to be a safety expert in London or in Zurich. They have people on the ground and they know the context, and this is important that the physical context in the combination of data could lead to a better and faster decision-making process.
Yeah. Can I just add something very quickly, Marcus, to what Frédéric said? You mentioned, I agree with everything except one thing you said, which is the person in charge of road safety. That's a big problem. I know it's not what you defend. The problem is, I mean, look, if you fly in an airplane, every member of the crew is in charge of safety. As you go on a ship, every member of the crew is in charge of safety. I mean, we have to make sure that and enable city governments to make sure that all transport professionals, all certified professionals who have the ethical and the legal responsibility to make streets safe, that all of them, be they transport planners, traffic managers, civil engineers, architects, landscape architects, urban planners, urban designers, that all of them are aware and capable, aware of their role, of the importance of their decisions for road safety, and capable to act on that responsibility. And one of the biggest problems is that people don't have access to information about the status of safety. And even if they do, it's past crashes. And it's not about, I mean, stuff happens, fine, right? What about predictions? And so, you know, it's really critical. If we want, it's critical that people take responsibility, and we have to help them. take responsibility. And that's the key thing about the data. Is not to have the data, you have the data. It's to make sure that people have access to the information, to the insights, and they don't have the time or the capability or the software to be able to do that, to do their job, That's it.
Thank you very much for that addition, Pedro. Since we've been looking at the decision-making process so far in the last 10 minutes of this session, I would like to take a very brief look into decision impact assessment. So let's assume that we have taken a certain action, like transforming a street into a 30 kilometers per hour speed, or that we have redesigned the street. Like, what do cities know today about the success that they achieved with the measures that they've taken, about the impact of the decisions that they've taken? Pedro, maybe you can give a brief insight into this.
Well, what we hear from the members that are reducing speed limits. So just a short clarification here, so to reduce the speed, we need basically to reduce the speed limit, and as soon as possible to follow up with traffic calming measures and network management measures that will, actively, because the speed limit is a sign. So we need to change the network in a way that it really makes people unconsciously follow the law. Now, because it takes time to change the network management and it takes time to implement traffic calming measures, what many cities are doing is that they're reducing the speed limit first, and then they're following up with the rest. Not a perfect approach, but I would argue that considering the different constraints, maybe the better. And there are two things there to consider. One is the post, what happens after that. And what happens after that is that what our colleagues are telling us is that, people first, they kind of complain, and the people who own shops or low public transport, they complain, but after it's done, everybody loves it and nobody wants to go back. This is a very impressionistic thing, but that's the consistent indication we have from everywhere where this is happening. The other thing is that before implementing this, we need to overcome a series of myths. For example, that reducing the speed limit will increase congestion. Well, it won't. But the problem is that, transport has lots of these paradoxes that people who just rely on common sense, it's like discussing football or whatever, or music. Everybody has an opinion. Doesn't mean it's a good opinion. Doesn't mean it's, based on solid facts. But does reducing the speed limit increase congestion? Actually, it helps increase the capacity of the network. The speed limit reduction increase air pollution? Actually, it reduces air pollution. Does it increase noise? Actually, it decreases noise. Does it reduce the commercial speed of the public transport? Actually, it may actually provide some gains. So the point in the numbers, in terms of numbers of crashes, injuries, and deaths, they're more than clear. The jury is clear about that. So the big challenge here is to really spread the knowledge. I think today we have the means, the knowledge and the means to substantively reduce traffic deaths and serious injuries. The real challenge, but if we would look at traffic deaths and serious injuries as caused by a virus, we would quickly understand that the vaccine has been invented. And the big challenge that we find today is not to find new vaccines. It's to accelerate the production, the distribution, and the application of this vaccine. And at the same time, to find a way to overcome the resistance of people who don't believe in medicine or vaccines, for that matter. In having numbers, as Frederick mentioned, there's always in the end, it falls down to people to make decisions, and there's always a leap of faith, right? You can't never be 100% sure that this will work. But there's a difference between jumping over an abyss that has 100 meters distance, or through data, in insights and examples from others, bringing closer and closer both sides. So you still have to do a leap of faith. You'll never close this gap, but you can bring these things closer. You can make the jump less frightening. And that's, I think, the thing that data won't close the gap, but it will make things easier, less scary.
Thank you very much for that. Like I would theoretically ask Fred to provide an insight of what a scalable software as a service solution can provide to make sure we have a transfer of knowledge and best practice sharing across different cities. However, Pedro, you just already did that. So thank you very much for this. And I think it was a very exciting conversation today. What we learned across the different questions and answers was that there is a large number of data. However, it is not a purpose in itself to have this kind of data, but that it's very relevant that we translate this data into providing a fuller picture, a better picture, an actionable picture for cities, and that we meanwhile also account for the differences between different cities and organizations, and that we do not try to deploy a one-size-fits-all solution or possibly. With I'm happy to today's web, and I would like to invite everyone to join us next week, when we have two different speakers here. On the one hand, there will be the CEO of Mobility Data Space, Tobias Mitana, and on the other hand, there will be the CEO of Vianova, Thibaut Castagne, where we will together take a deeper look into the full world of data from connected cars and what challenges there are to make this data accessible to third parties. So with this being said, thank you especially to our two speakers. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'll see you next week, Wednesday at lunch break. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcus.
This is it.
Yes.